Okay, let's unpack this. We are tackling one of the oldest, the absolute highest stakes questions known to humanity. Does God exist?
Right.
But we're not just, debating theology versus science in some abstract way.
No, not at all. Or listening to the same talking points you always hear.
Exactly. We are doing a deep dive into a very specific, incredibly high velocity, and yet, and this is the key part, remarkably civil intellectual fight that happened way outside the usual Western conversation.
Indeed. We're focusing on the legendary Indian poet and screenwriter Javed Akhtar, a really staunch secular humanist.
A giant in that space.
A giant.
Yeah.
And he's taking on the young, very sharp, very articulate Islamic scholar, Mufti Shamail Nadwi.
And the setting for this is just as important, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It took place right in the heart of the Indian intellectual world, at the Constitution Club in New Delhi. But this wasn't some, dusty, closed-door academic.
No, this was built for the digital age.
Perfectly calibrated for it.
And that medium, the platform that's really central to the story here, this was broadcast by the Lal Top.
Which is one of India's biggest digital news channels, for anyone who doesn't know.
And the impact was just immediate. It was staggering. Within 24 hours, the debate had already racked up 3.5 million views.
3.5 million.
So why does that matter? Why do we care about the view count?
Well, because it means this isn't just a local discussion. This is the global intellectual struggle playing out in real time for everyone to see. It's like a digital darbar, a public court of ideas.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating evidence, really, for this global tension between, ancient established faith and modern, often very aggressive skepticism. People everywhere are looking, sometimes I think desperately, for high-quality, structured debate that actually takes both sides seriously.
And this dialogue coming from the Indian subcontinent just perfectly mirrors that whole global tension. You have this rationalist tradition meeting a deep classical Islamic intellectual lineage.
All of it just laid bare on a massive public platform.
So our mission today is, it's pretty comprehensive. We need to synthesize the definitive arguments that both sides chose to bring to the table.
They're philosophical weapons, so to speak.
Exactly. And we have to understand the specific, really high-stakes rules they set for this conversation. And then, at the end of the day, we have to reveal why this whole thing, even if it didn't produce a clear winner, is so crucial for our shared future.
Especially in this age of instant media and, let's be honest, pretty deep existential questions.
Right.
And we have to start with this one extraordinary detail. It really sets the tone for our entire deep dive. Despite the sharpness of the debate, the intensity of it.
It got heated in the audience.
Oh, yeah. But the scholars themselves had this crucial agreement.
The civility. You're talking about the civility.
Yes. We're told the moderator actually had to remind the audience at certain points that these two men, they had planned to share a meal right after the debate was over.
They were going to sit down together, break bread, and keep talking.
And that is such a profound, necessary lesson for you, the listener, who has to navigate these high-stakes digital debates every single day.
That intellectual disagreement, even on the most foundational topic on Earth.
It does not have to mean personal enmity. It doesn't mean toxicity or hatred. It demands rigor, absolutely, but it allows for respect.
And that respectful but rigorous framework is precisely what we're adopting for this deep dive.
Well,
Now, to really appreciate the intellectual sophistication on display here from both Akhtar and Nadwi, we have to recognize they're not just inventing these arguments on the spot.
oh, not at all. They're the latest combatants in a philosophical battle that is, it's older than recorded history.
So where do we start? How far back are we talking?
We're talking millennia. If you look at the earliest evidence of human belief, say 40,000 BCE, those worldviews weren't about morality or ultimate truth.
It was about survival.
Purely survival. If I'm an early human, I'm not asking what is the ultimate good.
No, you're asking, how do I make it through the winter and not get eaten by that saber-toothed cat?
Precisely. It was all animism, these spiritual forces in nature that you had to appease to try and control the uncertainty of life. The question only started to shift from, ritual to genuine philosophical inquiry with the Greeks.
Socrates.
Right. Think about the revolution that people like Socrates brought, questioning the gods of Olympus, forcing a rational critique of what everyone just accepted.
And for this debate specifically, we have to talk about Plato and Aristotle. They really set the stage.
Absolutely. Plato, with his idea of the form of the good, introduced this standard of perfection, of objective truth that existed somewhere beyond the physical world.
And Aristotle.
Even more critical for Nadwi's side of the argument, you have Aristotle, who formulated the idea of the ancient, the necessary first cause.
The prime mover.
The prime mover, the uncaused cause.
Yeah.
So God was first debated as a philosophical necessity, a logical requirement, long before being defined by specific religious texts.
And our two modern contenders, Akhtar and Nadwi, they are standing right in the shadows of these giants. Let's trace Akhtar's intellectual lineage first, the rationalist.
Sure, his secular humanism didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's deeply rooted in Indian skeptical traditions, specifically something called the progressive writers movement from the 1930s.
And what was that?
It was a huge cultural force that explicitly used literature, poetry, art as weapons to challenge established religious dogma and rigid social hierarchies.
So using art and reason to push for humanitarian values, that's his ground.
Exactly. And philosophically, he's drawing from Voltaire's sharp, witty skepticism against the church and, of course, 20th century atheists like Bertrand Russell.
But you can trace this kind of thinking even further back, right? Even within Islamic tradition itself.
You can. All the way back to the Islamic Golden Age and the Mu'tazila school.
Yeah.
This was a rationalist school of Islamic theology, dominant from the 8th to 10th centuries, that put a huge emphasis on human free will, ethical responsibility, and, most importantly, the primacy of reason aqlin, or aqlin, understanding everything.
So Akhtar is basically standing in a long tradition that uses logic to challenge institutional authority, whether it's religious or political.
That's it in a nutshell. Now, on the other side, Mufti Shamail Nadwi. He represents an equally robust but very different intellectual lineage. He comes from the Darul Uloom Nadwatul Ulama tradition.
An institution founded in the late 1800s.
1894. And the key thing here is that it wasn't founded to reject modernity. It was founded specifically to bridge classical Islamic learning with the new intellectual and scientific challenges coming from the modern world.
That's a crucial distinction. He's not arguing from some kind of intellectual bunker.
No, he's a product of an effort at synthesis. Which brings us to the medieval period, when thinkers weren't trying to reject reason. They were trying to reconcile it with revelation.
And how well did that synthesis actually work? I mean, did it survive the Enlightenment?
For centuries, it was incredibly powerful. You see it with Ibn Sina or Avicenna around 1020 CE. He formulated a very sophisticated early version of the contingency argument.
Which Nadwi leans on heavily in the debate.
Heavily. Ibn Sina argued that everything that exists is dependent on something else, so logically there must be an independent, necessary being. A couple of centuries later, you get Thomas Aquinas in the West, adapting Aristotle and Islamic thought into his famous 5 ways to prove God's existence. Again, all using pure logic.
But you mentioned there's a huge defining shift that separates those historical debates from what we see between Akhtar and Nadwi today.
Yes, and this is so important for the listener to grasp. Historically, the big conflicts were often theologian versus theologian, arguing over which interpretation was correct.
But today,
as Akhtar's position perfectly embodies, the conflict is theologian versus secular humanist. Modern secular humanism, which often uses science and atheism as its foundation, is now its own established, autonomous intellectual position that stands completely outside of those traditional theological boundaries.
and that modern skepticism, it often feels incredibly urgent, doesn't it? Shaped by things like post-World War II anxieties, where seeing mass suffering on a global scale led so many people to question divine benevolence.
It gives the skepticism its moral fire. Akhtar is the voice of that cultural reality on the Indian stage. He's the voice that accepts Nietzsche's point that divine authority just doesn't dictate social reality anymore, and that humanity has to take full responsibility for its own ethics.
And to even begin to discuss that, they first had to agree on the rules, on what even counts as proof. And this is where the debate got really, really interesting. I mean, way more rigorous than most public discussions you hear on this topic. They didn't just start throwing punches. They first had to agree on the standard of proof.
Right, and Nadwi, as the one making the positive claim that God exists, he laid down the rules right at the start.
The standard they agreed on was a call, pure logic and reason.
But it's not just thinking hard. Nadwi insisted that any argument presented had to be definitive. It had to be logically inescapable, a certainty you couldn't rationally reject without contradicting yourself.
That's a very, very high bar.
A huge bar. And setting it that high, immediately forces them to exclude almost every common starting point for this kind of debate.
Particularly science.
That's the first and most important exclusion for you, the listener, to understand. Nadwi argued very firmly that science cannot prove or disprove God. To even ask it to is to make a fundamental category error.
Okay, let's unpack that. What's the category error? What's the difference in methodology here?
So science, by its very definition, is bound to empirical evidence. The physical, the observable, the measurable world. It's called methodological naturalism.
Okay.
But God, as defined in this context, is a metaphysical, non-physical reality, a concept that exists outside of time, space, and physical laws. So the tool of science is literally incapable of accessing the subject.
So demanding physical proof of God is like using the wrong instrument for the job.
That's exactly it. Nadwi's analogy was crystal clear.
Yeah.
He said demanding empirical evidence of God is like using a metal detector to look for plastic.
And if the detector doesn't beep...
It doesn't mean the plastic isn't there. It just means you used the wrong tool for that kind of reality. He basically called the secular demand for physical evidence childish.
That sets a really strong philosophical boundary. What else did they have to rule out?
Two other big ones. First, revelation. Nadwi said he wouldn't quote a single line from the Quran or any other scripture.
Because Akhtar, as a secular humanist, doesn't accept them as valid sources of proof.
Correct. And second, direct observation. The whole show me God argument was dismissed for the same reason as science. You're using a physical tool, your eyes, for a non-physical reality.
So with all that off the table, the whole debate gets narrowed down to pure deductive logic.
Exactly. And this is where Akhtar immediately turns those rules against the very foundation of religion itself, the idea of faith.
This was maybe the sharpest moment of the whole debate. His critique of faith, or iman, versus belief.
It was brilliant. He argues that if you have logical and empirical evidence for something, you don't need faith, you just have belief. He gives the example of the North Pole.
Right. I've never been there, but I believe it exists.
Because of overwhelming rational evidence, common sense, witness accounts, and so on. But religious faith, Akhtar says, is defined very differently.
His definition of faith is what?
Accepting a claim with no witness, no evidence, no rationale, and no proof. He argues that the moment you accept something that defies logic, you're willfully suspending your reason. And he used the word stupidity.
Wow.
He claims this is exactly why religion so often demands surrender and forbids too much skeptical questioning of its core beliefs.
So the very fact that religion requires faith instead of just presenting irrefutable proof is, for him, evidence that the proof doesn't exist.
It suggests a weakness in the foundation. That's his point. Now, of course, Nadwi would argue that's a caricature of faith.
That Akhtar is misrepresenting what believers mean by it.
Yes, that true philosophical faith is a logical conclusion, not a blind leap. But that tension was at the absolute heart of the debate. For Akhtar, faith is an absence of reason. For Nadwi, it's a requirement of reason.
And that logical requirement brings us right to the core proof that he tried to offer.
So the central philosophical battleground set up under these strict rules of logic, of a call, was the cosmological argument.
Specifically, the contingency case. Nadwi presented this as his definitive, inescapable logical proof for God's existence.
Right. He started with that classic analogy, the pink ball on an isolated island.
Before we get to the ball, let's make sure we explain the underlying idea of contingency really clearly.
Okay. Contingency just means something exists, but it could have not existed. Its existence depends on other things.
Like this microphone. It exists, but only because someone designed it, factories built it, materials were mined.
Exactly. It's contingent. It's dependent on a whole chain of causes.
So back to the pink ball on the island. It's not enough to just say it's there. The question is why this ball in this form is here. It needs a creator. It's contingent.
Precisely. Now just expand that ball to the size of the entire universe. Nadwi argues the universe itself is contingent. It depends on causes, it's bound by time and space, and cosmology tells us it had a beginning.
The Big Bang.
The Big Bang.
Yeah.
Therefore, logic demands that this whole dependent system must be caused by something that is not dependent.
A necessary being.
A necessary being. Something whose existence is logically impossible to deny.
And what does necessary mean in this context?
It means its non-existence is impossible. It has to be independent, eternal, and powerful enough to create contingency in the first place. The necessary being is the only logical place to stop the chain of what caused that.
To reinforce this, he brought up the infinite regress fallacy. We should probably explain why an endless chain of causes is seen as a problem.
Sure. The infinite regress is the idea that A was caused by B, which is caused by C, and on forever into the past. And while infinity is a concept in math, Nadwi argues it's a logical fallacy in real-world causality.
What's the analogy he used?
Think of a library where every single book was written by the book that came before it. If there was no first book, no original author, you'd have no books at all. To get to this present moment, this conversation, the chain of causes has to have started somewhere. Logically, we have to stop at an uncaused cause.
Okay, so that's the core philosophical engine of theism. But this is exactly where Akhtar, the rationalist, pushes back with everything he's got.
This is the rebuttal.
If logic demands a cause for everything, why does the theist get to just arbitrarily stop asking questions when they get to God? Feels like a huge logical leap.
And that was the absolute heart of the rationalist rebuttal. Akhtar questioned the whole idea of a necessary being. He pointed out, if complexity requires a cause like the contingent universe, then God, who theists define as maximally complex, omnipotent, omniscient—
It should be more contingent. It should require an even bigger, more complicated creator.
Exactly. By just defining God as necessary, the theist is basically defining the answer into the problem, not proving why that's a justified place to stop the logic.
He's saying you're just smuggling the answer into the premise of your own question. Why not just assume the system itself is eternal?
That was his counter-proposal. Why even assume the universe is contingent in the first place? Akhtar brought up cosmological ideas like black holes, cyclical universes that expand and collapse.
Suggesting that maybe physical reality has just always existed in some form.
Right. And if something has always existed, the question of its cause vanishes. It doesn't need a creator.
Which leads him directly to that powerful skeptical tool, the burden of proof.
This is the bedrock of philosophical skepticism, and it's perfectly captured by Bertrand Russell's teapot.
Explain the teapot.
Russell said, if I claim there's a tiny china teapot orbiting the sun, too small to be seen by any telescope, you can't prove me wrong. But that doesn't mean you should believe me. The burden of proof is on me, the person making the extraordinary claim.
So Akhtar's stance is, the person who claims God exists has to provide the definitive proof. The skeptic doesn't have to disprove it.
They just have to say the proof you've offered isn't good enough. Akhtar puts all the pressure on Nadwi. Until your logical proof is so undeniable that no rational person can reject it, the only honest position is humility. To admit, we don't know.
He also used the historical trend of the fading gods, pointing out that history is littered with dead gods.
Jupiter, Ra, thousands of others. They were once believed in with the same absolute certainty that people have today. And they've all just faded away.
It's an inductive argument based on observation against Nadwi's purely deductive argument from logic.
And Akhtar's implication is clear. Statistically, the current religions and their gods will probably follow the exact same path. The strength of his position isn't proving non-existence. It's observing that religious certainty is fleeting and cultural, while skepticism is universal.
So moving away from the abstract logic of cosmology, this is where the debate became deeply emotional. It hit the raw nerve of human existence.
This is where Akhtar, as a humanitarian, puts the undeniable, horrific suffering of the world right on the table. He challenges the very idea of a benevolent, all-powerful creator.
The ancient, perennial challenge to theism, the inconsistent triad.
He articulated it perfectly. How can you reconcile three statements at the same time? 1, God is omnipotent, all-powerful. 2, God is all-good, benevolent. And 3, evil and suffering exist.
It seems like a logical contradiction. One of those has to be false.
And he didn't use abstract examples, which is what made it so powerful. He used specific, gut-wrenching details.
How can a God like that allow 45,000 children to die of hunger or from preventable diseases like diphtheria in specific places? He named them Gaza and Kalahandi.
And he used that suffering to expose what he called the prayer paradox. If God can and does intervene to answer what seem like trivial, selfish prayers, a green card, a new job, a victory for your sports team,
right,
why doesn't that intervention extend to preventing the catastrophic, senseless suffering of children? If God is capable of interfering in the physical world, then the choice not to interfere with mass suffering makes the system seem arbitrary. Or worse, malevolent.
Nadwi correctly labeled this an emotional argument because it appeals to our pathos, but he was still required by the rules to offer a logical rebuttal.
Which is known as a theodicy, an explanation for why a good God permits evil.
And his primary defense.
It was the classical free will defense. He argued that evil is a necessary part of accountability and genuine moral choice. To remove the possibility of suffering and evil would be to remove our agency.
We'd just be robots.
Spiritual robots, as he put it. Life in the divine view is a test. And without real stakes, the freedom to choose good or evil, that test and the whole concept of ultimate justice becomes meaningless.
But that doesn't fully explain things like a tsunami or a child getting diphtheria. Those aren't the result of human choice. How did he deal with that?
That's where he brought in the concept of the all-wise God al-Hakim. Nadwi suggested that we humans, with our finite perception, are judging reality based on a single pixel. We only see the immediate tragedy of the starving child.
But God sees the whole picture.
God, being El-Hakim, holds the full picture of ultimate purpose, of consequences, and of eternal recompense. Suffering in this limited life, he argued, is balanced by eternal justice and reward in the next. Our tiny bit of wisdom can't possibly comprehend the total picture.
He also made the case that evil is functionally necessary for us to even define what good is.
That's a powerful philosophical point. You can't know light without darkness. You can't know justice without the concept of cruelty. And he argued that suffering often acts as a crucible. It drives our noble qualities, compassion, bravery, and fuels progress as we try to overcome disease and injustice. The world is designed to be challenging.
This feeds right into the second major tension point here, the morality debate. Does our moral compass need a divine foundation?
Akhtar presented a really robust secular argument. He grounded morality in humanitarian ethics and social contract theory. He argued that morality, insaf, or justice, is a purely human concept.
So traffic rules?
Exactly like traffic rules. It's something we developed for societal cohesion to help us survive better together. He reminded Nadwi that nature itself, the lion eating the deer, a virus spreading, is completely amoral.
So justice is just a function of utility and consensus. It's a social agreement.
And Nadwi delivered a really potent counter to this by focusing on the danger of subjective morality. He asked, if morality is only based on what a society agrees on, what happens when the majority decides something objectively horrific is actually good for their group?
Like Nazi Germany.
He used the dark examples of Nazi Germany and ISIS. He argued that without an objective, transcendent anchor God, you lose the philosophical ground to define any action as fundamentally absolutely wrong. If a majority decides genocide is right, then in a purely subjective system, it is right.
And that's a deeply unsettling challenge to secular humanism.
It creates a philosophical vacuum that the secular humanist has to fill. Nadwi's point was that the very moral outrage Akhtar feels about the dying children in Gaza, that outrage proves that Akhtar secretly believes in an objective morality. He believes that suffering is truly wrong. And that objective truth, Nadwi argues, can only be grounded in a divine lawgiver who sits above human opinion.
So moving on from the philosophical and ethical weeds, the debate shifted to the real-world sociological and psychological impact of all this. How do faith and doubt affect human societies?
Right. And Akhtar used this compelling, if highly provocative analogy to describe the role of organized religion.
Cancer-alcohol analogy.
The cancer-alcohol analogy. He actually acknowledged that, moderate use of religion, like a small amount of alcohol used in medicine or with a meal, might offer some social good.
The longevity, community cohesion.
Maybe. But, he argued, religion has this dangerous inherent tendency to multiply and grow exponentially.
Like cancer cells.
Yeah.
Or alcoholism that gets out of control.
Exactly. And what does that proliferation lead to, in his view?
Massive societal destruction, poor social outcomes.
Yes. He implied a direct correlation between high religious fundamentalism and high rates of repression, the denial of human rights, especially for women, and just a general stifling of intellectual progress. He's basically making a consequentialist argument. Just look at the results.
And of course, Nadwi had to come back with his own set of sociological data to argue that secularism doesn't automatically fix everything.
He completely flipped the statistical argument. Nadwi cited statistics suggesting alarmingly high rates of sexual harassment, crime, and social breakdown in many liberal Western countries.
So he's trying to show that moral crises are universal, regardless of the belief system.
Precisely. His point was that secular societies, for all their focus on human-centric ethics, also struggle profoundly to maintain social order without a divine, objective anchor that instills a fear of ultimate accountability.
This gets into the psychology of belief, doesn't it? We know from a lot of research that belief in God often acts as a kind of an anxiety buffer.
Yes, that's terror management theory. TMT, for short.
And what does that say?
It basically posits that we humans manage the existential dread of knowing we're going to die by clinging fiercely to our cultural worldviews, faith, patriotism, whatever, that promise some kind of symbolic immortality or meaning. The need for belief isn't just cultural, it's often a built-in psychological survival mechanism.
But at the same time, we have to acknowledge the paradox that it's doubt, it's skepticism, it's challenging the dogma that drives progress.
Absolutely. Akhtar hammered this point home. All the technology they were using in that debate hall, the electricity, the microphones, the global broadcast, all of it was a product of people who questioned what was accepted and who often faced persecution from institutional authority for doing so.
So there's this historical conflict between institutional faith and free inquiry.
And it's been an undeniable engine of material advancement.
Now let's pivot for a second to the medium itself. This whole incredibly complex philosophical fight, centuries of history and logic crammed into 2 hours, was immediately chopped up into clips, shorts, and sound bites.
And that is the danger of the YouTubeization of philosophy.
It's a critical point about our modern world.
It is. These nuanced arguments are just not suited for a 60-second short format. That environment actively encourages a winner-loser mentality in the audience.
The goal isn't genuine reflection anymore.
No. It's just to see your ideological champion win the point. The format itself, the container, threatens to simplify and debase the incredible complexity of the content. Intellectual humility dies in the comments section.
Which is why, in the end, you have to conclude that they were often basically talking past each other.
They were using entirely different ethical paradigms. Akhtar consistently came at it from the lens of humanitarian ethics. It's a consequentialist view where the main goal is minimizing immediate physical suffering in the here and now. The moral imperative is to relieve pain.
While Nadwi was using the lens of divine jurisprudence.
Precisely. Nadwi's framework is based on ultimate purpose, eternal accountability, and a wisdom that's beyond human understanding. For Akhtar, the death of 45,000 children is proof of divine failure. For Nadwi, it's proof of the necessary conditions for eternal justice and the difficult exercise of free will. They weren't solving the same problem.
So after all of that, what does this mean for you, the listener? After almost 2 hours of intense, structured argument, from Aristotle's prime mover to the inconsistent triad, the ultimate significance of this Akhtar-Nadwi debate is precisely in its refusal to give us an easy answer.
That really is the synthesis.
Yeah.
Neither side got a total knockout. Akhtar didn't logically dismantle the concept of a necessary being, and Nadwi didn't provide the kind of empirical or universally inescapable proof that would ever satisfy a committed skeptic.
The question itself just seems to resist a final, definitive resolution through reason alone.
It does.
But the real victory wasn't in the arguments, was it? It was in the process. The simple fact that this high-stakes, globally visible conversation even happened, this disagreement of dignity, that's a testament to the unique wonder of the human mind.
The capacity to confront the most volatile topics without resorting to tribalism or violence. That's the highest takeaway for our digital age. The conversation itself is progress. It's a model.
And the question is still so urgent, maybe more now than ever, with technology racing forward.
You mean with AI and transhumanism?
Exactly. We're moving into an age where we might start creating new forms of intelligence, maybe even new life, that radically challenges our definitions of creation, intelligence, and what even constitutes a necessary being.
It forces philosophy and science into a very uncomfortable proximity. If we create a truly conscious AI, are we its creator? And if so, what created us? The God question it mutates. It keeps pushing the boundary.
So we want to leave you with this final provocative thought. It's something that was implicit in their whole exchange. The ultimate truth of this debate might not be about whether God exists or not. The focus, instead, should maybe be on the impact of the question itself.
The question acts as a mirror.
What kind of humans are we becoming while asking the question, does God exist? The very act of asking reveals so much more about our hopes, our fears, our responsibility to each other, and our capacity for wonder than it does about the silent cosmos. And that is a question worth pondering in the quiet moments after this deep dive.